Hello and welcome to Nacht, Waffen Pilot with Penny Bradley. And I want to give a great shout out to Pyramids on Mars for my theme song. Thanks, guys. Today's guest is Tony Rodriguez, and I have known Tony since 2016 when we were both sitting in this support group together trying to figure out how to go public. I was going public because I was getting shot at, and Tony was going public because he was looking for counseling. So I'm going to just let Tony tell his story first.
Sure. Hi, Penny. Thanks for having me. Hi, everybody. In the early days, firstly, so I had my memories, basically like the big breakthrough moment where I had all my memories kind of come back to me and make sense in 2015. And after that, I started to contact
they all
people.
Made sense at once?
Yeah, there was like you know what it was? I was in denial of what I remembered because I always thought, because I could remember having a job and having a career and having friends and being on a spaceship, serving on a ship. And in my mind of having a regular life and all my memories in chronological order of growing up in Michigan, and you know what I mean? Like I had a normal life. I would tell myself, so when did that happen? That must have been a dream or something crazy. I don't even know. I was in denial of it. And when I learned about how the 20-year tours that they're taking people and that the government has access to the tech that they traded from ETs to take people and then put you back in time and return you into your bed just a few minutes later, I went, oh my God, that happened. And that moment was like that was like an epiphany, like a nuclear bomb of an epiphany on steroids. Because as soon as I accepted that I was gone for more than I always had the clear memories of the initial abduction, and I always knew I was gone for that night. Once I accepted that I was gone for decades, all the memories began. Not only did the stuff that I remember make sense all of a sudden, and I went, oh my God, that happened. They led to other memories, because then I started to entertain them. You know what I mean? Like not turning them away. And it was like, so I had a big moment, and that was in May of 2015. May of 2000. And so for the next few months, I kind of staggered around going, what am I going to do with all this? You know what I mean? And I remembered more and more and more. It was like, years and lots of memory. It wasn't just a little bit. And so I knew that I wasn't going to I knew that I wasn't going to get in the phone book and get a counselor and have any kind of great results. I was going to get medicated. Do you know what I mean? When I told somebody that I was a cargo engineer on a German spacecraft out of the Ceres Colony Corporation, you know what I mean, and went interstellar. So as soon as I was going to get medicated, and I knew that. So I started talking to other people, looking for the groups like where you and I met, and other researchers, and I kind of sent messages out to people, and some people worked with me and some people didn't. And I got some good researchers.
You were lucky.
It was in the early days.
You were very, very lucky. I was part of a chat room where we had been looking for an online counselor who would not medicate us, and we had gone through 5 different groups, and finally we said, fuck it, we're going to form our own.
That's right.
I mean,
right.
That's exactly what we did. And every month somebody went batshit. For 6 years, I have had somebody that I considered a good friend go batshit on me every damned month. And it's been 6 solid years of this. So this is not a stable community. So I do understand why shrinks want to medicate us into oblivion. They don't know what to do with us. I was having trouble with my doctor because he says, Penny, you're either anxious or depressed every time you're here, and you're giving off this energy. And I'm like, dude, do you remember hearing about MK Ultra? And he went absolutely chalky white and said, oh. And I said, I'm using Native American shamanic soul fragment retrieval, and I'm reintegrating altars, and your medication interferes with that. And he goes, okay. And he has never brought it up again.
Yeah, a lot of people, this is something that maybe the general public's not aware of, is a lot of people that have been through these programs were greatly traumatized. It's not something, it's not just a brief couple weeks of training traumatized. Like I've talked to people, since I went public, a lot of people have contacted me and asked for help. And, I have a life too. I have a normal life, a family. I work a lot of hours, and this is kind of something that I feel, I didn't want to take any of this to the grave. I think it's important for people to know. I think it's, what you're doing and telling after coming forward, we talked about this earlier too, like coming forward is actually safety, because now if something bad happens, people will immediately say, like I said earlier, like if you choke on a chicken bone, some people are going to immediately say, well, she knew too much. So it's actually a safety net, people that are silent and then want to stay behind the scenes. I think they're at more risk to have some kind of a intervention from people that want to keep us quiet.
Well, I was shocked by how many people thought that Facebook permabanning me last year was them endorsing my testimony. That shocked me, because I got attention from people that I had no idea even knew who I was, and that was a shock. And this last week, I've been unable to log on to Facebook, and
a lot of people.
I cannot even get to the login to find out if I'm still there or not.
Yeah, wow.
I'm still on Twitter and MeWe and Discord if people need to find me. And my email still works if you have it.
Penny, I'm thinking you got something local. So I think in the last 6 months, they really sent a lot of messages that were like Trojan horses. A lot of people are getting, virused and having problems with their accounts. I think that's one way that they're getting in, and they're targeting people in this community specifically. The YouTube, there's been a great deal of shadow banning. I've done over 100 interviews on YouTube, and they've been greatly, they're buried. They're still there, but they don't come up in the searches now. They've been buried. So there's a shadow banning of all of the secret space program subject matter. And this is kind of scary. This is something
I stopped using the tags on mine.
Right. And I've heard that a lot. You can't put anything in the title of it, especially anything related to COVID or any of those more taboo subjects there. The suppression of free speech right now should be alarming. Most people aren't alarmed by it, and I totally am. This is something
I've been mortified. In fact, you probably don't know about him because he's more on the liberal side, but Glenn Greenwald was one of the founders of The Intercept, and he just was forced to quit because his own editors have been censoring his work.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was because he was critical of Biden.
Oh, wow. So he was a liberal that was right. And I think a lot of people, here we go. So this is like a huge black hole. As soon as you speak a little bit, you're going to get sucked into, because this is a once in a lifetime political event. Here we are. This is Halloween the 31st. We got voting on Tuesday. This is a once in a hopefully, this is a once in a lifetime political event. Like most of the time you can kind of turn your head to the presidential race because they're both politicians and they're both not out. You know what I mean? Like they're both candidates are kind of more towards the center, and that. So you can just kind of, it's a much more relaxed feeling, where now we have completely polar opposites. We have Biden, who's easy not to like or not support, and Trump, who has proven not to, you know what I'm saying? Like Trump's very brash. So,
I'm looking at it as potential for civil war, no matter who wins.
Yes, you're right. And there's going to be such a fervor.
It's scary.
You guys couldn't convince me that we are not actively in World War III.
We are in a war. We are in we just the same term. Take the same term. So we now have a new prefix for all these things because, like I said, I'm not banned. My videos are still on YouTube, but they're not in the searches. They're shadow banned. We're not at war. There's not bullets being fired, but we are being shadow. It's a shadow war. There's a war going on behind our backs. Yeah.
For the audience, my repeat interviewee, Eric Hecker, is also here today and will be speaking with us. So that's who that other voice is.
Thanks, Penny.
Thanks, Eric.
Hey, Tony.
Yes,
But I agree with you 100% for the shadow banning. I have looked your name up specifically because I've always been paying attention to your videos, and you are correct. They are not as immediately available. Neither is the term secret space program. I mean, you used to type in secret space program and pages and pages and pages of the stuff that we're familiar with would show up. And now you're getting History Channel stuff on the X-37, NASA secret stuff, and that's not
being buried. Yes, it's being buried.
Yes. And that's the polite stuff. I actually feel that you are correct. Yes, there are not bullets being fired, but I would suggest that we are in a massive global World War III regardless, with weapons that are just not the conventional ones that we're familiar with. There's much worse going on.
Far more effective. Yeah. We've had cities burned down. We've got over 200,000 dead in America. We've had cities burnt down. It's far more damage to a city than one or two expensive missiles can do. It's been very cheap and from very far away. And there's unrest, and people are unaware of the power of the media that's leading these. You know what I'm saying? At some point, So the other thing is, so we're either going to lose, and at which point the media is going to go, everything's okay, go back to sleep. Here's your football game. COVID's gone. Do you know what I'm saying? There you go.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's kind of going to be like a law, like an unknown loss, right? But then, if it's not, and it carries on, so we're eventually, if the fight keeps going, the media is going to have to get tackled. At some point, someone's going to have to say, look, the media is a national security issue. The amount of bias that they have right now, I don't mind the media being biased as long as there's a flip to the coin that people can subscribe to, and that's not anymore. Here we go back into politics, but the laptop deal is being completely. I mean, people really have to have their head in the sand to think that the media is not hiding that there's not a fraternity of people that are controlling these things. Not only the news media, but the online social media. They're all on the same page. And the only way for that to happen is if there's technically a conspiracy. And so if you're not paying attention, anybody that it doesn't make sense to what we're talking about, it's like, you're gonna have to catch up, because this is real and it's playing out in front of our eyes. Like, they're at war, so it's not the same subtle way that they do it where it's completely hidden anymore. It's in a hurry. They're doing things in a hurry.
And during the last administration, the NDAA signed into law again that the federal government is allowed to subsidize news stories. It used to be illegal for the federal government to produce news and propagandize within our own nation. And a lot of folks don't know that changed. And they're absolutely allowed to manufacture news.
That changed, and I threw an absolute fit about it. And the big three just basically buried it.
Mm-hmm.
Dog fight. There's trick-or-treaters beginning outside, and there's dogs fighting outside. I'm sorry, guys.
It's all good. I'm happy you have kids roaming through your neighborhood. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, well, we'll see. You know what I mean? Like, I'll have a look out after this and see if they're all in bio suits. But
I have a bowl of candy if they come to the door. So I live in a rural area, so sometimes we get folks and sometimes we don't.
Yeah, it's new for us, so sorry about that. But when you think about what the magnitude of the media and how people are influenced, like some people, you can't present anything to them. You can't even have a decent conversation anymore. Where my entire life, when people were at polar opposites of the spectrum of the politics, it was still pretty civil. It was very rare to get a shouting match. But now, you can't even talk one direction or the other, and it turns into a shouting match quick.
Well, I grew up where my dad was a John Bircher, and my my mom's dad was a New Deal Democrat, and they talked politics every Sunday after church, all afternoon. And I would be sitting there listening to them. And they told me I could have any opinion that I wanted as long as I could defend it from both of them.
Sure. Right.
So I've been political since I was 10.
Well,
and for me to not have it in my videos so that they can be Facebook safe or YouTube safe has been really, really hard.
Yeah, I bet. You know,
I read the same way, Penny, that, you know, when you really have a firm grasp of the conversation, you have the ability to debate either side of the topic. You could choose which one you agree with, but you're educated enough to be able to defend it from both sides. And I'm sorry, if you don't have that capacity, you probably shouldn't be in the conversation. But a lot of people nowadays, their ego gets in front of them, and they think because they know 50% of the conversation that they're an expert on something.
Yeah. Far less of it. No, well, there's no historical. What it is they don't present the history. Nowadays they say, well, he's done this, but there's no historical context. And you got people that are just tuning in because now it's a louder thing, and they don't have the context of it.
Tony, now you're lucky if they read the story beyond the headline.
Yeah, right. It's true. Well,
you wanted to know the history?
Yeah, and before the politics, so both sides, they each had one. They had a deck of cards, and each of them had 2 or 3 cards that everybody wanted. You get what I mean? So it was what you, and then the cards that you didn't want, that they would just select that one, and that's how they played that on you. That's how they played the game. But now, there's very few cards that anybody wants at all. Yeah. You're right. So you know what I mean? Like
exactly.
They've dropped the pretense of caring about us.
Crap that they're wanting to dump on us at once, and so there's suddenly a bug so that they can do it.
Yeah, and there'll be something else next year. We'll see.
Oh yeah,
it's been something every year this entire century.
So look, let's spice it up though a little bit, because the reality is we're very close to a disclosure, and you can see them rolling out disclosure on us. Fox News, I said that. Fox News had a story that UFOs are real, and that they had a credible scientist on there, and they presented it as fact. They didn't say the guy was kooky. That they had metal that wasn't made from the Earth.
From the other side, the New York Times and Washington Post put the Tic Tac sighting on the front page, and people still ignored it. And the Pentagon verified that was a real sighting of a non-terrestrial craft.
Right, they're laying down the groundwork right now, so the people, everybody kind of knows, but everybody thinks it's not that big of a deal, because they go, oh, by the way, here's this, but then they make it out like something else. Civil is a much bigger deal. So they're laying the groundwork now.
You should have seen my neighbors, because I live in an apartment complex with 8 apartments. When they put the Tic Tac on our local TV news, that comes through cable, they came and got me by the hand, dragged me to one of their apartments and said, "We know you know what this is about, spill." So they're starting to pay attention.
Well, they're starting to show us. It's the beginning of it. So I think that's why you see in the desperation by the government. They want to be they want to be on top when there is the disclosure, when there's the big moment that they're going to disclose. And I'm of the mind that they're going to do it pretty quick in the next few years. I think that it's going to go after the moon mission. I think that was the original disclosure plan, was they were going to go to the moon in '69 and find some kind of ruins there, or find some proof of it, civilization, and go, whoa, what is this? And then they could contact us and say something like, now that you found us, we can have contact with you. And that way it starts out on that foot, and they can continue and do any kind of, unwind it any way that they can. I think they're going to roll forward with that plan. I think that the Artemis missions are going to find ruins on the moon, and then at that point we can be contacted. And the average Joe that doesn't pay attention to any of this is going to swallow it, going to handle that. Rather than what is the reality is that we've been in space for over 100 years, and there are colonies and great infrastructure throughout the solar system.
Well, it's beyond the solar system from my service.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's
So,
we did intergalactic missions on trade on the Max von Laue, and so it's very space is not the inaccessible as we would be led to believe from the movies and all the sci-fi and everything. It's a long trip to the next star. It's always a long trip. We're going to be there in a few hours. It's not the case. They can get there instantaneously and then make another go jump instantaneously and be in another galaxy. So that's the breadth of the situation, and that's how many ETs can access us. That's why it doesn't make any sense when one person has a testimony from one form of contact and another person has another and it's totally different. That's because they're ETs from completely. It could be from another galaxy or another galaxy yet. It would be way farther. Like trillions and trillions of civilizations can have access to us that quickly. That's the science behind interstellar flight. So,
and the public needs to understand that not all of these ETs like each other.
Absolutely.
Because the ones that Alex Collier talks to don't like the Draco. I've had interactions with Draco and mantids and raptors on Mars and greys and various other races, and including the Anunnaki. And a lot of these folks don't like each other, and there are wars out there that have been going on for 1 billion years, and they're not going to change overnight.
And that's right.
And, and a lot of them understand. The public needs to understand that they're hearing from both sides, and they're hearing mostly propaganda from the ETs because they think we're stupid. And watching the news, I can see where they got that idea.
Prove them right. Well, you know, I always equate it to, you know, the same way. So people go, what? There's a lot of questions that come up when they talk to me. They go, Tony, well, how come ETs are like this? Why don't they talk to us, or why don't they just come and help us? And the analogy I use is like, look, we live the cosmos is not like a city; it's more like a forest. And you wouldn't go into the forest, and if a fox is in the forest and it hurt its paw, you wouldn't go and help it. You would pass through the forest because you're in a food chain, and you would go on about your way and handle your own business and let the creatures of the forest be. And that's what we are. We are in a forest, and so are the life forms that are throughout space. And some of them are more advanced than us. You know, some are more advanced life forms than others, and some are more advanced than us, and some are not. And that's kind of the reality of the situation. We've also been lied to think that we are the top of the food chain, that we're the smartest, best thing. And that's not the case either, because there are many, you know, and there are classes. So Penny, I don't know if you remember this from your service, but we talked about it on our ship a lot whenever we were doing our morning report of where we were going to go. They had classified life, the extraterrestrials that we were going to deal with, by the amount of words that they could communicate. And once they got into telepathic communication, it's not so much words, but you know, that it's not so much that they had different words or, you know, 1 million different words that meant a million things, but they could instantly communicate 1 million words worth of data. So it was like, if I, you know, when you make telepathic communication with one of these beings that are more advanced than us, and they ask you, you know, and you ask them, you know, how was your week? And then the answer that comes back is the entire week, every second of it. You know, that amount of data they can transfer data because they have a consciousness that big. So we classified them, you know, we were anything, you know, and I've said this in many interviews, is people go, well, what is it if it was a mantid, what is it? I'm like, well, it's a person. Well, what if it's a reptile? I'm like, it's a person. Because once it's right around 150,000 words, this is a person. It could be a bucket of goo. It could be a bucket of goo. And we can speak 150,000 words. We refer to it as a person. Once it was telepathic, it had more, 200, 400,000 words, 500,000 words, and was telepathic, then it was a meta-human. It was meta. That's what we called it. And then there was an ultra-human, and then there was another entire class where they just called it was a class like a U1 or something. And that they were beings that could basically suck all your memories out, and you know what I mean. They could just brush through, and that is why they led to a lot of compartmentalization on the ships. So the people, I was in cargo, so I wasn't even aware that we had a weapons systems division. They because beings could come by, and they had shielded areas of the ship that had a lot of interference for these beings, so they couldn't just suck the memories out of the command crew or the front of the ship, but we were exposed in the back in cargo, so they just kept us oblivious to the facts of, you know, how fast the ship could go, where it went. If we got scanned and they took all of our memories from us, it was all not very valuable information. We didn't know about the weapon systems. We didn't know really our location in space, where we were, where we came from. We didn't know any of that stuff. And they kept us dumb for that reason. It was a security issue.
Where as the navigator, I was in that secure area, and I was chipped into the ship's computer and had access to the whole thing. And I remember in one of or more of your interviews, you talked about that time whenever that they would tell you to stand still. That's when you're going into or out of hyperspace. That is when it is most likely for mistakes to be made if biologicals are moving around.
Yes. So, and then the other thing, so when we used natural portals to go through other galaxies, is what that was. Mm-hmm. We used a natural portal, and and you're right, there was everybody was disoriented for a few minutes. There were people that, mm-hmm. My first few times I did it, I threw up. I got nauseous every time, and then there was a lot of people that would puke as soon as they got there. You had to drink water, and you had to sit, and because we had a work score, so you couldn't just do your job. Some people went through it and felt fine. A couple of minutes of being dizzy, and they were right back together, and you got used to it. And then some people needed up to 10 minutes to kind of get their act together, get back to work. So in order to keep the work score even, the productivity score, you know, because you got rewarded for it, they made everybody sit there still for 10 minutes. And as for the safety measure, for, like you said, because people, if they were working, trying to keep their score up, they would be tempted to work even though they weren't really, you know, not dizzy, not disoriented, and mistakes could happen, and something bad could happen. So they had a red light. It was not like the red alert. That's not what it meant. But when that red light was on, you were not allowed to be at your post. You had to sit there and wait for that light to shut off, and it was
as the person,
very annoying. It was very annoying.
As the person on the other end trying to make sure no one was in a bulkhead or a floor, it was a very nice thing to know that y'all were staying put.
Yeah, it was. I just remember a few times when I thought, man, this is totally unnecessary. And well, you know, but they had such a good carrot and stick about things that you wanted to work. They had you very motivated. You wanted to get back to your job. You wanted to do good because you get rewarded for it. You know, like they made a contest out of it, and you wanted to participate. And how many industries do that now? You know, how many sales people, they want to get out there and get hustling because they turned it into a competition. There's a real way to motivate people with that. That's the same way the Ceres colony ran things.
So well, that's Penny, the way that the German civilization in space operated things. There were always competitors, some usually two, but sometimes 3 or 4, and it would be rewards if you were the best, most productive, and there would be penalties if you screwed around. Honest mistakes were generally overlooked.
Yeah, they were all at the captain's discretion, and I in the later years, I had pretty cool captain that. I'm going to cover a lot of that in the book. I'm writing a book, and it's coming along, and really the book has turned into, you know, people ask me questions about how did this happen, what happened next. Nobody really asked me what was he like, what was your captain like, what was the guy like that took care of you in Peru, you know, like nobody asked me that question. That's really what the book has turned into. is kind of explaining what everybody, you know, my relationships with the people I had. And I'm really, honestly, it's a great feeling. It really brings a lot of closure to it all, because there are things that I never had to think about before, you know, that I didn't have to remember. So.
Yeah, I was looking when I was starting to write mine, and I've been working on it about 2.5 years. But I started to write it, and it was like, okay, how did we get there? Because I served with the Germans the whole time I was out there. And it was, as I was writing, it turned into these questions in my own head. Why did the Germans abandon Earth in the first place? Where did they get the occult knowledge for the SS? You know, things like that were just driving me crazy. So I had to stop and do historical research, because I knew what they had taught me in Shula on Mars, but I didn't know if that was objectively correct or not. And so I've gone from what they taught me in Shula and done the research to back it up. And it's been really hard because there's so much propaganda out there.
Right, and that's what we're seeing. Like, that's back to what we were saying about the shadow banning. That's exactly how they do it. They take, you put something out there, and instead of attacking it and giving it legitimacy and, you know, putting a stamp on it, they just bury it in a bunch of crap. They just put a bunch of faults around it, over it. Yeah. They just bury it. And so if you have 10 of them, they put 50,000 others that are all crap, so that you can't find it. And if you did find it, you don't know, because it's you know what I mean, camouflage. You don't know. How do you know the truth on something complex on on that subject? So unless you went through it like we did and have your memories back, you won't recognize it. And you can see it. You can see that they're doing that right now with our subject, with the secret space program subject. They're beginning, and they've really ramped up. They left it be for the last 4 years, you know, and maybe got in there and made a tally of who. And there for a while, I had electrical problems everywhere I went. Every time I did an interview there for a while, and that's mostly stopped. There's a few times it happens, but now it's just getting buried. They kind of saw where I'm at and where I'm going, and now it's just, there's a burying. Penny, I wanted to ask you, how many people have contacted you that have memories? And if you had to estimate, you know what I mean, like how many people have contacted you that have memories of being taken and then getting the memories erased? What'd you say?
In the time I've been public, there have been at least 400 people that have contacted me. I have done counseling of some sort with over 100. They never want to pay me.
True. Well, I'll tell you what, in the beginning, I would have.
I have Social Security disability, so I don't have to have the money to survive. So I tend to help people who need help rather than worrying about whether I get paid or not. And I found that about half of the people who come to me are Rh negative. And because of who their families are, they go into space, do everything that we did, and then come home, put back in time to when they were taken, and they come home and their own parents are trafficking them. That's been the recent thing that people have finally started opening up to me about, and I'm like, oh my God, what is wrong with them?
There's a very real connection that has been pointed out to me by other researchers between child abuse, being abused as a child, and then being taken and going into these programs. There's a real connection to it there. So, well, in fact,
I wasn't abused before I was taken, but I've been raped since I was taken.
Yeah, you know, there are things like, you know, there's more of a scientific information around luck. Some people, you go, man, they're just so unlucky. The same bad thing keeps happening to them. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and really, it's a kind of like a polarity. It's kind of like it's your consciousness. There's a polarity, And I've always worked with people and said, you know, when you experience a trauma, that you're helpless at. So trauma is one. There's many different forms. If you have a traumatic thing, you could have done something different. If you were in control of the situation and it turned traumatic, you can kind of put it to rest and say, next time I won't do that. But if you're in a traumatic thing and you have zero control over it, you tend to seek it out again. And I think it's a subconscious, just like a mechanism to seek out the trauma again, so that you, in an attempt to master it. And my example is, I don't know how many times I saw it growing up, but there was always a girl that had an abusive man, and they would finally break up, and she'd pass 20 great guys to get to another abusive man. That was rare. And I'm like, how many people, you know what I mean? Like in my social circle, it was very rare. But it was because, now that I look back on it and I think about my own trauma that I've been through, it's in an attempt to master that. It's, you know what I'm saying? Like you find another abusive man so that you have another chance to change him and become the master of that situation. And it doesn't make sense, but really it's kind of like a subconscious thing.
Well, that's why I haven't married Lou, is because I made the connection between the piece of paper and husband wanting to kill me. So there.
Very important.
Very important. So Lou and I do not have that piece of paper, and he has not tried to kill me once.
Isn't that one of the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not kill thy spouse.
That's one of my 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill thy spouse.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a great start.
It is. So either direction, men killing women or women killing men, either way, it's not a good thing.
Yeah. The other thing, so by de facto, so I mean, Kim Penny, the reason I asked that question is I'm sure you didn't start out to be a counselor when you started talking about this. When you came on those groups, you know what I mean? I'm sure that wasn't your goal, was to work with people.
I needed to talk. And when I was talking to people in the group, it was a private group, it was just us, and it was like group therapy. And that was what we had set it up for, was group therapy. And people started coming to me individually, and it was like, what makes you think I can help you? I mean, pardon the cussing, but I was such a fucking mess.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, talking about it to sort out your own things is one thing, and it's great to ping it off somebody else. But a lot of people, every time another interview would come out, I would get people messaging me saying, me too. How do I do this? There was a time when, it was a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, that the idea dawned on me, and I got a hold of Elena. And we worked on a thing, like I thought maybe we can make a PDF for people to read and just give them somewhere to start. Because like I said, in the very beginning, when I got my memories back, I was kind of a basket case. And just because my take on the world around me was totally broken. You know what I mean? Like nothing made, and I wanted someone to talk to about it. And so I think Elena got mad at me because during that time, it was like I went up and I ended up working like an 80-hour week for a long time. And she was like, hello, this was your idea. You're going to help me. And I think she got mad. So she made her own and put it out. But I kind of went MIA on her. I just couldn't keep up with things. It was like I was juggling. I had too many pans in the fire, kind of. But it was a great idea.
I understand that.
She did her thing. But since then, so, it's early for this, but I got a hold of Jackie Pierce, who I've been working with, who is a dynamo of a person, and she does courses online and for a lot of things. And I made a course on memory retrieval, and it's kind of like just somewhere to start for people. And I've had a lot of good feedback on it. Now, it does cost money. Remember how you said they don't pay you, but it's automated. I'm paying for the service to happen, so it's an automated thing.
So they have to pay to get it.
Yes. Right. And what it is, in the beginning, when I was looking for help, like there's nothing. And I've had. Yeah,
there's absolutely nothing out there for us.
I mean, I've had a few thousand people contact me. There for a while, it was 4 a week, 2 to 4 a week, every week forever. It just never ended,
Yeah.
And
it got to where that when they broke my shoulder last year, and I was taken for a mission, not SSP, but still CIA related. I was taken for a mission. I did my mission, and on the way back, they told me that they didn't want me reintegrating any more alters, and that they didn't know why they had not been able to kill me, but they knew they could inflict pain, and they completely destroyed my left shoulder. And after that, it was like I was in too much pain to help anybody. And there were people who went batshit because I was no longer available to them. And I ended up blocking probably 30 people on Facebook because they wouldn't take no for an answer.
Wow. Right. Yeah. And some people, you can't get back to them. I've had people get mad at me before because I can't get back to them. And it's, again, there's no money changing hands. So there's no obligation. But what I found was, in the beginning, like I don't know when your memories came back, was it all in kind of one moment, or was it over time?
They used a remember code on me, and it was this big lump. And
Sure.
the most emotional.
I remember you telling me that now. Yeah.
The most emotional stuff was on the top, and it was all in German. So it was like, what the hell am I remembering? I mean, the first thing on the top was the Mars Raptors breaking into the Shula lunchroom. And it was like, okay, I know that didn't happen on Earth. And I could smell blood, human and theirs, and I could see, and all of the sensory stuff was there, but all the words were in German. And I, Penny on Earth, I can read German, but I really don't understand it while hearing it. And when I speak it, I'm like a little kid. But there, it was like rapid fire. And so I don't understand what they're saying in the memories. And I've made progress towards reintegrating that altar. She's here, but she's still separate enough that when she shows up, becomes the front altar. She's still that German officer, and she's aggressive and arrogant and demands obedience and picks at people she considers her inferiors. And I'm sure you've seen plenty of those officers.
That's that's exactly the culture up there. Yeah. That was their culture,
So that was the me who went through Shula and was the fighter pilot on Mars, and then the navigator in a freighter like what you served in. So probably an older freighter, because it was still the cigar-shaped silver thing.
A cigar one, yeah.
Yeah, so. But yeah, that I spent 55 years in that altar. That's what they did. Most of my services with the Germans have been 60 years or thereabouts. The ones where I've been taken for Kruger, and yes, I have, those run 20 years because they put me into a clone body. But if you're in a clone body, they can do 20 years. But Nacht Waffen does not like to do that because their regen tank doesn't work on clones. What it does is regenerates the mind and soul of the clone and kick out their asset. So they're left with a mind that has no training at all. So that was probably why when you were burned that they didn't put you in regen.
Right, it was a whole new body, I believe.
So yeah, that was what they've done to me in Kruger. Whenever that, the altar that served with Herr Mayor, and we're having to call him that so that he's not revealed. I had died in battle, and that was when you were in the chat room when I was talking about that I was killed in battle, and that altar was back with me for 32 hours, and then they came and got her and put her into another cloned body. And it wasn't long after that Nacht, Waffen purchased her contract, and I went to work on their Spatz, the Sparrow, the ship. So that was a 20-year contract, and I did 5 years with Kruger and 15 with Nacht, Waffen. And the major killed the clone himself so that I would remember him and the ship and the crew, because if I had to go back to a base, they would have mind wiped me. He wanted me to remember, so he broke protocol. But I have pretty good memory of that altar. She died twice and was rebodied both times, and the last time he sent her back. And his memories of that event are different from mine, so I'm not going to say what happened.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about, so it's been my experience, when you're talking about 20 years of relationships with anybody, about in any context, it's not something you can just explain away quickly.
That's true.
You know, you can't just explain it to where it makes sense.
We were on a small ship together as part of a crew of 12, where 4 of us were humans. Everybody else were ETs. And we were pretending to be contraband smugglers in Nacht, Waffen territory, Das Bundes. And we were going from base to planet to base, all of these little places that weren't frequently policed. And we were trading Johnny Walker Red for information. And we had a booming business.
Yeah, trade's a big deal. It's interesting that a lot of, like you're saying that it was off the records, like it was, but like illegal activity. I notice a lot of the whistleblowers that are coming forward that actually get the big microphone, everything, their organization never does anything illegal. And
they're lying.
Right. And so my experience was that's basically half of what that it was one colony versus the other. They wanted to outpace the other colonies. They wanted to advance, they wanted to outgrow them. And they like I said, it was back to the forest analogy. So when you go out in the forest, you're not allowed to cut down a certain tree by law and where you're at. But when you go deep into the woods, into the forest, who's going to say anything? You can cut that tree down all you want. No one's going to say anything about it. And it was kind of like, that's what I remember of my service too, is they had very little respect for the laws that they had all agreed upon. It wasn't until you got home that they began to obey the laws. But when we left port, we broke laws quite a bit.
Technically, when you make that tree illegal to cut down, you increase its value in the market as a commodity as well.
Exactly.
Right. And make it more desirable, and actually send people out looking for trees where they can cut them down unknowingly, unseen.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I remember about a lot of our missions were like that, where we were not supposed to say anything afterwards. You weren't supposed to listen to music, but we did. You weren't. There was a booming bootleg business from Earth. They were sneaking DVDs and books. They were sneaking things from Earth and selling them on a black market. And the guys, the commander, the officer of the main cargo bay was the one that was in charge of that. And the only reason I knew about it was because the other guys in the cargo crews, they would swap places when one of them got sick or something. One of them would miss. Yeah. So I'd get the guy from the cargo bay come and work with me, and he would tell me about it. And like they would sit and watch movies. They had access to movies, and there was a booming bootleg business.
I remember my commander would play movies for the crew. He would snicker, and it was in German, but he was saying, well, we don't know where this came from, but we're going to enjoy it.
Right.
And it would have German subtitles, and everything was in English. And I know when we watched Star Wars, we were rooting for the Empire.
That's funny.
They were so much like us that, of course, we would root for them.
That's probably who it's based on.
Yep. As one of those German officers, we used to get a lot of complaints from our allies coming into the solar system that Solar Warden was picking them up and vivisecting their people.
So there was an incident where our ship got pulled over, and I got a lot of the details wrong. This was in the very beginning. I got a lot of the details wrong, and I pinged them off some other people. They said, no, that couldn't have happened. Our ship was not involved. So I had the wrong ship involved, but we had basically stolen personnel from another colony, and took them out into the cover belt and put them in a warehouse there to be sold. Basically, they were slaves from another colony, and they were snuck on board the ship too. They were put in the lower cargo bay that was only like 4 feet tall. Like down there was a space, and what that space was the floor in the main cargo bay could go up or down. They could increase its size if they needed to. And when they had it at a normal size, then underneath of it, that cavity where it would go down, there was a space that was usually about 1 meter and 1.2 meters tall. And they would sneak stuff down there. It was like a bootleg, but the entire floor could hydraulically move down so that we could get tall items in. But we snuck people away. We heard about it, that there were people down in there, that we were taking them, and we were kind of freaked by it because there was no official, it wasn't in the cargo system, it wasn't in the system. And so we're like, what are we doing? Why are we even going out here? We're making a stop and there's no cargo. What's going on? And then kind of like the grapevine told me, and I heard about it through the guys, that there were people being smuggled. We dropped them off, and on the way back we got pulled over by a ship, and they scanned us. They had, I guess, psychics or intuitive people on the ship, and they scanned us to see if we were lying. And there was a minute where they played the communication over the loudspeaker between the captains, and before that we were told to think pleasant thoughts, that we were all had freedom. That's what they said. Think about your freedom, about how great, how wonderful it is for you to be free, and your thoughts, and just think like that. And it was the weirdest thing, but I remember because it was a tense moment. I'm like, how are we? So at the end of that, when they played over the intercom, our captain, and he was very rude to the other ship's captain, it says, if you're going to waste any more of my time, because this is a giant waste of time, we didn't do anything. But we knew what was going on. The guys in the cargo bay knew, because we knew about the people that were underneath the cargo bay. A couple of the workers, the guys in the bay, had laid eyes on the people. They looked. We went down there and looked when they were on. So
wow,
that happened. That stuff like that did happen.
Well, I knew that my transport ship, we worked with the Armada, and we were material support. So we would bring in troops whenever we did a lot of police actions for the Draco. When a planet would decide to rebel, basically the equivalent of Kansas rebelling. Okay, so the Draco would work with them for sometimes decades, trying to get them to settle down and go back into the fold and behave. And when it became obvious that war was going to be the only result, they would call in the German Armada. And I was the navigator for one of the supply ships in that altar. And we would bring in troops, ground thumpers, and we would let them out, and we would orbit for a while and then land and pick up prisoners of war, and we would take them to a factory for conversion into cyborgs. Usually it was planetary corporations running the factory, and I don't know what we got in exchange. But this was a regular circuit that we would do during the police action. So I know I was involved in some really nasty shit. I know there is really nasty shit going on out there. And I know that it's not just the Germans involved in it. I know planetary corporations, aka ICC, is doing the nastiest stuff. They're actually doing the conversions of human beings or other sentient life forms into robotics.
Oh yes, and they trade people regularly for that, to people to be, I've had people that call BS on stuff that I said, well, bullshit. They would just make a robot that could do that. What do they need you? What, you know what I mean? Like if they can travel to other planets and have all this technology, they could just build a robot. Why would they need slaves? And I say, well, wait a minute now. In a few talks that I've given, I said, last year, in the entire year, you used as much kilowatt energy as a light bulb does in 24 hours. A 100-watt light bulb in 24 hours uses the same amount of electricity rather, than you did everything you did last year. So you're incredibly efficient, number one. Number two, when you build a robot to do a certain task and it finishes the task, you have to build another robot to do the next task. So in other words, if you have one dig a hole and then you want to build a building over it, you have to build one robot to dig the hole and one robot to dig the building, whereas a person can do it all for that. And then number three, when you leave people alone, a group of people alone for a time, and you come back, there will be more of them. And so robots don't do these characteristics.
We are really bad for reproducing, aren't we?
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. Like robots don't, unless you would have to make a specific robot that would just only reproduce. Build more. So what I'm saying is, we really are the best robot when you're talking about labor. We can do things very skilled. I mean, you can look at carvings of old cathedrals and things. I mean, look at the skill that people have, and the same people that did that can do other medial tests. They can do many, many tests. So people are the best robot.
Yeah,
and that's a big deal.
Science is trying to copy the human to make a robot. I mean, ultimately, that is the goal. The target is the human body. It is the perfect robot per se. The issue is the control mechanism. That's all. How do you control the robot? Well, I think the science has been working on that for decades now, and has probably gained a lot more ground than people want to understand.
Well, and the other thing is, I think that, when you think about so they've misled us. Our pop culture, our entertainment, everything has misled us to believe a lot of things that are wrong. Like I said, number one, that space is inaccessible. And if it was accessible, that it would still take you years to travel to somewhere close. That's wrong. And the other thing is that
definitely wrong. In 1964, it took me 20 minutes to get from New York City to Elis Prima.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody in the jumps are about 30 minutes total.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that people don't believe that they're being mind controlled, that mind control is possible. Like they do the hypnosis, like on Oprah, they have the guy that snaps his fingers, and the person, you go, I don't believe that. There's no way. Maybe that guy is not right. Maybe that particular form of hypnosis, but the mind control is real. And we're seeing it play out, back to the politics. You're seeing mind control. People are mind controlled because they haven't met either candidate personally, and they have huge feelings towards them over things they heard from third and fourth and 10th parties. Mm-hmm. And so, you know what I mean? Like that's a form of mind control because they bombarded it. It works.
It's an inappropriate response for somebody to be that passionate about something that they're so distanced from.
Right. So imagine taking a group of kids, and then one kid saying there's no Santa Claus in the room, all kids, all 5 years old, and one kid comes in and they go, no, 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 none of the kids will believe him. You're full of it. But if an adult comes in with authority and says there's no Santa Claus, half those kids will believe it, or a number of those kids will all of a sudden believe that because of the presentation of authority, even though that person really might not have authority over them. Mm-hmm. So that's adults. We're doing the same thing. So the media presents everything like they're the authority, and people believe it. And they used to be bound by law, like you were talking about earlier, Eric. They used to be bound by law to tell the truth, and they're not anymore. They're not bound by law to tell the truth. There's actually nothing that can happen to them if they bold-faced lie about politics. You know,
and how could that go wrong?
Yeah, what's the worst that could happen? Right. That's kind of where we're at, you know. And sooner or later, it's going to have to be confronted, or we are going to be underfoot. We are going to be underfoot of it forever, for a long time.
I'm really trying to impress upon people, like you just said, that we are actively in a state of massive mind control. But people don't want to hear that. They don't understand the technology. They don't want to stick around for the conversation where you explain it to them.
No.
These things are very real. The technology is hardware today.
The more successful people are in the system, in the financial system, so people that have their bills paid, they have money saved up, they're very content with where they're at. They don't want to hear any criticism of that system. So and they'll resist it. You know what I mean? I don't want to hear it. And so unless you present something that comes from within the system, from the authority figure, you're that kid in the class with the. That's what I'm saying. You're just another kid in the class. So you can say it all you want. They're not going to listen to you. You don't have the authority. Correct. If you present somebody, if you put the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain and he's the giant monster, then he's got authority, and all of a sudden what he says matters, and it's wrong, you know. And that's kind of what you don't, once you realize it, once you unhook and you realize it and kind of step back from it. And that's what I said, like when I got my memories back, that's when I kind of unhooked from society, because I went, whoa, this is all bullshit. Whoa.
Yeah.
Because of what I remember, I went, wow, now I got my memories back. Before, the memories were kind of all over the place. You know, one minute I could remember being on the ship. I didn't know why. The next minute I was on a different ship. You know what I mean? Like it all didn't make sense. And I thought, screw it. I don't even care. Screw it. When did that happen? It must be a dream. But once I internalized it, that was real. And then I had to prove it to myself, my own story. So we didn't go over it with the listeners. I hope everybody's familiar. But in the beginning, I found places, because in the beginning of my 20-year tour that I spent, the first 6 or 7 years on Earth, and I lived in places dualistically with myself. So I was living in Michigan in my organic life, and the other me was living in Seattle and in Peru and in Southern California and someplace for a short time. And I was able to find those places, and that was freaky because they were exactly like I remember. Imagine finding someplace you've never been in your life. Imagine me, you know what I mean? Like, waking up and you have memories of living in Peru for a couple years in a village out in the jungle. And then you go, whoa, that can't be right. And you look on Google and go, oh shit, there's the village. That's kind of what I went through. So it proved those memories. It validated those memories to me. And then I set about the task of validating it to other people. Sadly, it all checked out. Every time I keep thinking of a new thing that validates, and I check it with somebody and go, look, there's actually tons of evidence to support my story. If people have time to actually look. Most people, I noticed that most people that are critical, they watch about 3 minutes of any YouTube video, and then they say something critical, this is bullshit, and then they skip on to the next thing they're going to troll. But anybody that watches the volume of data, and a lot of people are critical, they watch 1 or 2 of my things, my interviews, and they criticize it, go, well, he said something that was a little bit different. Well, there's another interview where I explain why that I said it, so, but everything's been pretty validated, and people that have worked for me. And then I've had some people that were actual very talented researchers, very talented, what do they call that, where they data mine, very talented data miners. Okay. And they've been able to substantiate the people. I remember people and places very well, and I've had people that came up with a lot of data. The other thing, I want to go ahead and say this, and Penny, I think I told you when it happened, or I said it in a group, but just a few months ago, it was like 2.5 months ago, NASA released the conclusion of their study they did for the Al-Qadr crater on Ceres. And in the very beginning, everybody was like, that was the first thing. So what's this? When the Dawn probe was flying to Ceres is when I was kind of live with my story in and 16 was when, and they had the lights on series in the Okator crater. And I said, that's salt. There's a geyser there, and the water goes up about 11 kilometers and evaporates, and giant chunks of salt. And I believe there's magnesium. It's like an Epsom salt, but it's salt. And it snows back down. And that's what those white spots are. It's salt. And then originally NASA said it's some other chemicals, like, a ton of other chemicals that might look like that. And then they studied it. And just a few months ago, they came out and said, nope, it's salt.
Yeah,
and that validated me. It was so big. Like that morning. I
remember sharing that article and tagging you in it.
Yes, I remember we did that. And look, that morning, it felt like, finally, because
it had to have felt like Christmas.
It did. It was like a major victory, like a touchdown. I was like so excited, and it was first thing in the morning. It was like 6 a.m. when I got all this, and so I was driving to work, and I was like, I'd be driving along and go, yes, like it was that kind of a rush, and it lasted for the whole day.
You remember when I came up with the copper microwave engine? Do you know what that? Because people were asking me about what kind of engines, and we called it a copper microwave engine. When I saw Elon Musk's test of that, and they were calling it the quote impossible EM drive, I knew it was the same thing. And I had that same feeling of, oh my God, verification.
Yes. Well, and you know what, Penny, so that a lot of people don't realize that, coming forward is not easy. And
it's dangerous as hell.
Well, when your interviews come out, everybody's supportive. Your fans watch them immediately. But after they sit for about a month or 2 or 3 months, 90 days, it's all people that want to beat you up. And we, you and me both put up with a lot of criticism, and rightly so. It would be weird if people weren't critical. It would be strange if people didn't, not believe us.
Yeah.
So I accept that. But I'll tell you what, after you get so much of it, to finally get something that validates is just such a very powerful feeling, I wanted to put it on a flagpole, man, but it's just, and the other thing is most people don't care to hear it.
One of the things that they've come up with in the last 3 or 4 months is because I admitted to being SS while I was with the Germans. So now you've got these super Christians who have read a little bit of stuff, and so now they're deciding that my parents offered me to Odin as a child. I'm sorry, folks. My parents were Church of Christ. My father was a preacher. This would not have happened in 20 lifetimes.
Right. Well, and when people like that, sounds like those are people that have just a snippet of the information, so it doesn't make sense, and they just immediately attack it. You really have to digest a lot of the information, and there's a great deal, just in mine and in yours. When you talk about, like I said, when you talk about a decade worth of stuff, you take anybody off the street and go, tell me what you did for the last 10 years. Explain everything, every little bit.
Every detail.
Prove it. You know what I'm saying?
And complicating it is, I was 4 years old when they took me.
Sure.
I spent 55 years.
I
was taken back to 1959. What year is it now? How many years is that? Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking about Shula, when I was 9, 10, 11, how many years ago was that? We're talking close to a century ago. So yeah, I might get details wrong.
Exactly. For me, I go, well, I was taken 38 years ago, but then what happened in the last few years before I was put back was more like 58 years ago. So I'm remembering things from 58 years, or in the beginning of what happened in the early years of when I was taken. And on top of that, I was 10 years old. So I'm remembering being 10 years old 58 years ago. So it's not like it's a photographic thing. And a lot of people will pick apart every little bit that you say because they want you to be,
they want you to be wrong.
There's been a lot of people that are attacking the whole, well, look, I'm going to say this. I'm going to choose my words carefully here for you guys, because I know people are listening. So I'm going to choose my words. I have to be very responsible nowadays. I got to bite my tongue. But what I've got to say is that some of the most credible people that have come forward about the space program have absolutely trashed the subject of the space program.
Yes.
So, and they've worked actually in the opposite direction of disclosure, some of the most credible ones that have come forward. And it's a very big tragedy because we're going to get a disclosure. And the only thing that this is going to ensure, when people like me and you that are talking about it and other people get silenced or shadow banned, the only thing that ensures is that the disclosure we're going to get is going to be a pack of lies, like another wrapped up version, sanitized set of lies. And we're still not going to know what really goes on up there and what they're really doing underground and out of public view. I mean, so we're going to get a nerfed, watered down version of what's really going on, of what these programs have access to, and that's a shame. I feel
I've been concerned that the new Space Force was simply to cover up what they had done, and they would start their recording then instead
that's exactly right.
Yep. 100 years ago when it actually started.
They're gonna go, ta-da, look what we've got. This is our Space Force. We just invented this thing. I just looked at an article a few minutes ago that were like that they're gonna present things that they reverse engineered as DARPA inventions, the things that we invented, the reverse engineered anti-grav. So they're gonna roll it out over time. They're gonna give us a bunch of lies in the beginning, and they're gonna bury us. Well, it's somebody's plan. I don't know if they're gonna pull it off, but they're gonna bury us, people that have whistleblowed, that are talking about the secret space program, under a bunch of, quasi lies around us, or other people coming up. And, whatever.
Well, they're going to do the same thing to us that they did to Michael Ralph and to Bill Cooper, and hopefully they won't kill us on our front lawn like they did him. And so they will do their best to make us look like that we're either crazy or somehow traitorous, when we're simply telling the truth as we remember it.
I kind of knew in the beginning that all the things that I'm saying aren't going to really be of a big impact in the beginning. I think it's going to be after I'm dead, later on, when people have access to space, when it's kind of more, it could be 100 years from now. Somebody's going to be able to look back on my info and go, wait a minute, let's go there, and and look, and they'll be able to put it to a historical context. I think even what things that you're saying are going to be history for people to dig up, and it might be useful to people in the future. At least I've always had that feeling. I've always had that hunch that in this lifetime, right now, that we're not really ready to see how profound it is.
Well, that's the only reason I've continued working on my book, is because at some point in the future, it will be sitting there giving the history of how the Germans got into space and why. Because their history is so propagandized, and they're not even allowed to learn their own history in their own countries. It's against the law.
Yeah, well, and ours too. I think the United States history is being changed. Like, that's a major part of immigration, is learning our history, and they're trying to get rid of that so that people can immigrate. So that's one front where they're deleting our history, and I think that they're going to continue with that, because I talk to my children about what they're learning at school, and it's very, very watered down. And I look back at what I was taught in school in our history, and it was like, didn't make any sense. It was completely out of context when they told you about, what I mean? Like, it was just out of context. They didn't tell you how it all happened, just that it happened, or why it happened.
Well, when I was learning history in school, it was this year, this war happened.
Yeah.
And no context as to why there was a war.
Right.
I went to a parent-teacher conference, one of those start of the year things, meet the new teacher at the new school type things. And they were discussing how that year was going to be a banner year for the children for science, that they were going to get really deep into the subjects and discuss the 3 states of matter.
Oh my God.
And I went, 3 states of matter?
Yeah.
What about the 4th one? And she said, well, the 4th state, plasma, she goes, that's really complex. And we don't want to discuss that with them. I said, okay,
it's not very useful.
When does it get to that?
I remember hearing that in school, and they said that my teacher told me that because I knew about that back then. And I said, what about plasma? I looked it up,
Yeah.
She said, well, that's not very useful. There's no real use for it.
Yeah. Or it's the key to everything else.
Or it's the key, right? Or it's the unlocking of the universe, right? One of the other.
But put your nose in the books.
Plasma's the unlocking of the universe, but they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about the actual practical applications of as above, so below, that the universe as we know it is in layers, and that each is a copy of what's above and below it, as in molecules are the same as solar systems.
Yeah, I find that stuff kind of interesting because I feel like I knew that when I was 2, and then the whole world tried to convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
And then you look at where they've finally been using radio telemetry to map the universe, and it's looking like, gasp, a spider web, just like the Native Americans have been saying for millennia.
When I was at the South Pole, I had one of the scientists that I wintered over with explain to me the idea of time and space and the speed of light and how it can only go so far and so back, and how our whole conversation of everything is limited by that, because that takes that conversation and puts time and space in a bubble of observation, and none of our science is technically discussing anything outside of that bubble. So effectively, we're negating the vast majority of reality by looking at basically a grain of sand on the beach and then trying to define the reality of the beach off the grain of sand.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous.
It's worked though. It works.
It has worked. It has worked.
It works like a gem. It works to keep people,
yes,
both arrogant and stupid.
It paints a beautiful picture that the artist is in control of, and the artist in this capacity is not the observers.
Well, the Germans told us flat out in Schule that Einstein was wrong, that there is no limit to the speed of light, that the speed of light is not a constant, nor is it a limit, and that he should have kept his ether constant.
Mm-hmm.
And
Einstein told us Einstein was wrong. When the reporters asked Einstein what it's like to be the smartest man in the world, he says, "I have no idea. Ask Nikola Tesla."
Exactly. So, it is what it is. Until Earth level science rejects relativity, goes back to Faraday and the electronics, and picks up on quantum mechanics and introduces the electric universe as something other than a sideshow, we're going to be stuck with technology that doesn't work. Meanwhile, in space, even the American government is using the proper physics. So when there is real disclosure, all of the physicists, all of the electricians, all of these other people who are invested in the way things are now are going to be shitting bricks, because they're going to have to relearn their own fields.
This is kind of the reason I wanted to get in on this conversation, having followed both of your paths, experiences, so to say. I have an idea of my experience that I kind of want your guys' brains to chew on, because I think you'll understand it more than most. Tony, you stated earlier that it's challenging to work with these memories, right? Because you're looking back in time and your perspective changes from when you're a child to now. And I associate that with what I call like reframing a memory. So like as a child, we have a memory, right? But unfortunately, as a child, sometimes we are introduced to a trauma, so that memory is no longer something that we want to look at. So I imagine that picture, it's like it's now matted and framed. And that way our childlike mind can now accept it and look at it. It's prettier, but it's not truly the image. It's not the actual recollection. It's been like hot rodded to look nicer. Now as an adult, what I'm doing is I'm taking that matting and that frame off. So yes, it is different. And people will say, oh, you changed your mind. You have a different recollection. Yes, absolutely I do. Because I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not dumb, and I can take my own blinders off that I installed for my own trauma. Can you follow that so far?
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
Cool. Awesome. So here's where I'm going to go with my past. I also, as a child, was in the gateway remote viewing programs in the school without my parents' consent, and it wasn't fun. But now in the process of trying to put my memories together, because I'm nowhere near your guys' level yet, but I'm digging, okay? So in the remote viewing process, I found that the people that were in this, Ingo Swann, Paul Smith, Lynn Buchanan, all the actual science and brains behind this stuff, Russell Targ as well, they all stated that when you remote view, the viewer going into that area cannot make a distinction between their experience as a viewer or their experience in real life. They take it as real. And that's what they're saying, okay? So in this thought experiment, they also, well, I'm saying, before we get to the thought experiment, they also stated that you can remote view into your own future to gather intel. Okay?
Yes.
That's a scary thought.
No, it's true.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So here's the thought experiment where I'm connecting my mind's eye to make corrections for my memories, and it's very challenging. I believe as a child, they would have us all remote view into our own futures. Therefore, seeing your own future, your own unknown, would inherently be all of your fears. It is your own unknown. You would instantly become terrified of your own future. It's unknown. We fear what we don't know. So now as a child, let's just say, for argument's sake, at the ripe age of 8 years old, I'm privy to my entire future. But yet again, that was way back then. So imagine, let's say, yes, I'm 45 now. So yes, 45 years of information was at the very least, if not more, in my 8-year-old brain. Does that mean I'm going to remember it now? I can't even remember my birthday at 8 years old, but you're going to give me a complex thing like my whole future and then tell me you're going to remember it? According to the remote viewers, they're saying I'm definitely going to be impacted by it.
Well, okay, so that's a big, when you talk about, so remote viewing something, like you're talking about remote viewing your entire future, where it was my experience that we had access to bits and pieces of it. And the program.
And I wonder if that's just your current recollection.
Well, the program that I was in, what they were aiming at they would take 3 of us, mm-hmm. and somebody would be trying to remote view the future of a certain event. They would give a location or whatever. Somebody would do the future, somebody would do the present, and somebody would do the past of a location. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't good at it. That was actually the first stop. And I mm-hmm. want to talk to you about, I can name drop, but I want to do it off air. I don't want to get disappeared or something bad happened to me, but I'd like to talk to you later about that.
You got it. But now, even with what you're saying, I respect that was your experience, but I'm of the feeling that my experience was a lot more of them needing me to walk into my own future to gather intel, that because it can be done, that they exercise me at that excessively, and that I'm suffering the impacts of that. You know, how much of your own future is too good to know?
Or set in stone, for that matter. Because when you're talking about your own future, like if I remote view your future, it's a completely different mechanism than if you remote view your own future, because you have the ability to change it. I don't have the ability to make your decisions for you. You
Not
do,
as directly.
Right. But you get what I mean by that?
Yes.
And so remote viewing the future is basically you finding other people's decisions. So that was tricky because the program I was in, they were trying to figure out, the doctor was trying to figure out ways to make money off of it.
Of course.
And he was basically sort of successful, but I was not in the bit that I wasn't very talented at it. There were other kids, there were about over a dozen kids in the original, I call it a class. It wasn't a class, but in the original batch of us kids that were doing the intuitive.
The DOD calls it a class.
Do they? They call it a class.
I remember 2 years ago when I was really upset because I had been contacted by a DOD agent, I talked about it in the chat room with you. Okay. She said I was the last survivor of the class of 1964 of Langley. Yeah. So they do call it a class.
But I remember some other kids were better at it in my class. And you know what? I thought that growing up, like even after I did the 20 years and came back, I always had dreams of the next day. Like pretty much every day, I still dream part of, like right before I wake up, I would dream part of the day that it's about to happen. I always dream the future of that day, and it's something inconsequential, like, you know, if I get in an argument or, you know, road rage, like somebody cuts me off and I get mad, I'll see that snippet in my dream. It's pretty much useless information, but I thought everybody did that. But really, I think it was like a side effect of going through that training, of being in that class.
Very well could be. If something really traumatic is in my near future, I sometimes dream of it. So I also had problems with bleed over, because I have more than one altar active in the same timeline, but in a different part of space, that because it's still me, sometimes the veil is thin and I'll be able to piggyback the altar and see exactly what they're doing. And that has given me information that's probably seriously dangerous.
Years ago, I reached out to an author by the name of Anthony Peake, and he covers consciousness topics. And I reached out to him just strictly off of deja vu. Because prior to all the SSP stuff, I've been experiencing solid deja vu my whole life, which is on my list of things that now I go, hey, you know, that's a SSP type thing. But prior to, I was just intrigued by the science of consciousness, because my deja vu was very savage. And now with what I'm looking at with the timeline stuff, which is also, I mean, this stuff, you know, this is a very important book. Tony knows about it. Very few people are aware of it. I've
got a link to that PDF on my website, because that's really the basis of quantum holograph theory, and it's what they're finding out is more of what's reality now.
So you need to read the title, because we're on radio.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a good point, Benny.
Stalking the Wild Pendulum by Itzhak Bentov, and it's on the mechanics of consciousness, and the timelines in there, to me, were helpful for me to be able to put my timeline together. I know Tony professes religiously to make a timeline. It is very helpful. Myself personally, I'm challenged to write, and my timeline, I would say, is way out of being linear, much like my thoughts.
That was how I realized I had more than one altar out there, was writing a timeline, like Tony told me to do. That's one thing about us having been friends, is we've been comparing notes this whole time too. And for those of you who have sought out Tony, kudos, he's great. Now, I'm going to be rude. We have about 15 minutes left, and I promised Tony that he could talk about his paid sites and his book.
Sure. Well, I'd like to touch on that. So, Eric, we're going to talk later about a lot of this stuff, man. I
appreciate it, and at your convenience.
Yeah. So what I kind of touched on it earlier. What happened was I got kind of swamped with people contacting me, and I got to the point where people were getting mad, or I couldn't keep up with people, you know, that contacted me and wanted some help. They wanted some, you know what I mean, something, you know, they wanted something to grasp onto. So in the very beginning, it's very dizzying when you learn about these programs and you go, wait a minute, that might have happened to me. And the more you think about it and dwell on it, you go, that happened. And then your very first thing right then, when you're talking about something so far off of the playing board of your life, you know, off the board of your life, you need to speak to somebody about it. Really. I mean, that talking about it is really the only and best therapy. Is just being able to talk to somebody who understands exactly what you're talking about. And so I started to do that a lot.
That's what I do with people, is I just listen while they talk.
Yeah, and that's the best. That's the best way. But a lot of people don't know what they want to talk about because the memories are repressed. So the number one thing is, how do I get more memory back? And people, and so it takes a long time to work with it. It takes a lot of actual man hours to talk to somebody and kind of coax them along into that. And most people, I found, don't have a ton of memories. They don't have a lot of access. They have a few very strong, rigid memories, keystone memories, I call them. But then they don't have a lot. They want to remember more, but it's like it's a lifelong journey. And even people that have tons of memories, like even me, I'm still remembering things. Like I said, like I'm writing my book, I'm remembering the relationships I had with people. That's really what the book has brought out. Like nobody ever asked me about my relationships that I had with people, so I'm remembering more details. It's a good form of like closure. So I worked with Jackie Pierce, who is, like I said earlier off camera, she's an absolute dynamo of a person. She interviewed me a couple times and we started talking, and she put together a video course that I offered, and then a website that kind of gives a brief description of me and what I am. It's got the PDF download of that book, the Stalking the Wild Pendulum. It's also got the PDF of the CIA document that summed up the report for the Gateway program of Stalking the Wild. So that report is a great read too, because they weaponized it. They took the technology and weaponized it later.
Of course they weaponized it.
So that's a great read for anybody that's ever been in touch. But then I also have links because of the shadow banning. I have the links down at the bottom to all my interviews. Well, not all of them, but 99% of all my interviews that I've done. And so people can look at those for free. I also have a Patreon channel that, because of the shadow banning, so the Patreon channel that Jackie and I do weekly shows on, and that's like $5 a month for that. And we've had some really good shows on there that blew my mind, because it's nice to be on the other end of it, where you're not being asked the questions, that you're asking the questions to me. And really all I'm doing for that show is bringing back people that interviewed me in the past. I kind of rubbed elbows with people at different couple conferences and things. And so I've got kind of a list of interesting people. So that show's been good. But also she helped me, Jackie, because she offers courses herself. She's a medium. She's actually a medium. You can hire her and she can communicate with the dead. And it's hard to explain, but honestly, I was never skeptical. But when she did it to me, she rattled it off like matter-of-factly and so rapid fire. I was blown away. I wasn't skeptical, but I'm saying
Eric,
she just blew me away.
This is the answer to your question you asked me.
Well, I was just going to ask Tony, did he feel that her ability to communicate with the dead was of value to himself today in his SXP experience?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
she connected some big dots, man.
Okay.
Like there were things that I've never spoke of. There were things that only I knew. And she communicated with people that I knew in Seattle that have passed, that were in that house.
I've never spoken videos with her, and I found it very interesting. I miss that I don't get to watch them now, but I am very happy for you in the direction that you're going.
Thank you. Well, so far so good. It's what I mean. Like because of the shadow banning, I'm not getting the website out to a lot of people, because the video, like I said, they're actively suppressing this subject. So anyhow, it's TonyRodrigues.com, Tony, and then RODRIGUES on the end.com. And on there has a link to all that stuff and the Patreon channel, but it also has a link to a course that we put together. It's like a video course that you watch. And what that is for people that feel they went through it, something similar, and they have memories that they want to unpack. It tells the timeline is the first step, but it goes into other things that will just help. It's a starting point. It's not a cure. It's not a one magical pill, but it's a starting point for somebody to, you know what I mean? Because it's a whirlwind in the beginning. I mean, it's very disorienting to go, whoa, that happened to me. Holy shit, that happened to me. What did I do? Do you know what I mean? Like, and so I would have paid.
My first 3 years, I just sat and cried every day.
That's right. I was moved to tears. I'd pull over on the side of the road and start crying, thinking about some of the stuff that I remembered. Yeah.
Tony,
I still have days when I'm sitting here typing online, talking to somebody, and the tears are just running. I don't even try to stop them if I'm not on camera.
Yeah.
When you described your gateway stuff as a child, Tony, you talked about looking in the machine and making your selections by eye.
Yes.
That's what locked me right in. I had like a freak out moment at that point because I was like, wait a minute, I did that too. Because I remembered loving that machine. I remember I couldn't concentrate on what they were talking about sometimes because I was just trying to figure the machine out. I was like, how does this thing do that?
I was right. You just stared at an area of the screen and it would select your answer.
Oh, and I loved that machine for like, I mean, I was 8. It was like 1983 and it was ahead of its time.
Yeah,
I was like, what is this thing?
And this is something I missed because I'm a generation older.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It was another technology that came out after, right? Well, and you know what? I did classes on Series Colony that went back to the old school way of classes with the dry erase board and a teacher. There were on Series Colony, we did courses like that went back, and I missed it. I missed that technique, that machine.
But anyhow, about limitations.
No, they found that they were all about results, and they found that was the minimum input, minimum effort for the most results, and that's why they would do that. That's why they did that.
But the Germans are very into efficiency.
That's exactly that was their entire game. They had everything down to a science. I mean, really, even sweeping the floor, they had it set up to where whoever did it was going to do the maximum amount of flooring in that time. They had everything was down to a science. But I just want to say that nowadays I'm kind of worried about the subject of the SSP because the biggest voices have turned around and have been rogue about it. The biggest voices in the movement have really drove it off the cliff, and the other voices are being silenced. The people like us are being buried under it. So I'm really it's concerning. So I think that that's why I've gone to the Patreon, to the subscription, because we own that content, and it's less likely to get banned. As long as we don't put COVID in the title of the show, you know what I mean? Like then it's vague, and we get to talk about whatever we want on there, and it's just a method because it seems that I didn't think that I'd ever have to worry about this. That freedom of speech would be something that we would have to work for. You know what I mean? Like we shouldn't have to work for it speaking like this, but they do. If you say the wrong thing, and so many people just yesterday, Laura Eisenhower got her account deleted.
Yeah, Facebook. She did.
And she had one group. It was like she had something. She said there was like 30,000 people that she doesn't have access to anymore, and she's kind of a voice for the good guys. So we're in a war, man. We are definitely in a war, and so I'm kind of keep going in that direction. The book is coming along. It's going to be a very good read. It's going to be very comprehensive of my 20 years that I was taking and everything that I remember, even things that don't really make sense to me completely are in the book to explain it. And then there's going to be some revelations in the next year or two about that are going to come forward that I hopefully that by having it in the book now kind of comes into play later. So I can't really explain all that, but I think in the next year or two, we're going to get it. And I think that we're going to get disclosure after the Artemis missions, the first men on the moon in 2024, 2025, somewhere in there. I think we're going to get a disclosure, and the type of disclosure that's not just bacteria in space, but actually people. They're going to have us talking to people. And remember, they're all people if they can speak so many words.
Yes.
So anyhow,
that's been a big problem with my testimony is I start talking about people and they're thinking human, and I might be thinking something totally different.
Right, yeah, just a person.
Once they start breathing hydrogen or something else, they don't even look like us.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. There's a wide. It runs the entire gambit. The same as any other species, same as any other life form at any level. There's so many different versions of them. Every life strategy that can exist does.
Exactly.
So I just want to say that anybody that feels like this subject kind of hits home, that I designed that website. Jackie helped me. She really deserves all the credit in the world. She's an amazing person, and she's got tons of videos. And you can link to that through my website too. But there's ways to contact me on there. There's a course on memory recall. There's a link to my Patreon channel. There are links to that book, to the free download. There are links to the CIA thing, and there are links to free interviews that go on there. Like to put this link on there if you guys give it to me.
Oh yeah.
But it's a great place to start. It's not going to be the end of your journey. It's going to be a good place to begin the journey if you have suppressed memories, fragmented memories about this subject. So TonyRodriguez.com.
I look forward to sharing your stuff as well too, Tony. You know, folks like you and Penny, I just see as like jumping into the fight before everybody else and being on point. So I respect you for jumping into the fight. I appreciate that you still have the stamina. And I just want to, you know, help support you guys in this forward momentum. I feel like I'm showing up late to the game, but just, you know.
Gee, I thought of you as the next wave.
Yeah, we got to hand the baton off sooner or later, man.
I hear that, and I agree 100%. I want more people to step up. There's 65. Safety in numbers, and many hands make light work.
You're absolutely right. I expected more people by now. I expected more people with my level of recall to come forward and have some videos, and we are getting them. There are people coming, but unfortunately there's no way to tell, because all the info, you know, when I was in the early days, right, like Penny said, I was very lucky because I had some info that hadn't been spoken about yet, so I said it, and then it got, you know, confirmed. It was a confirmation. Now all the info's out there, so you can't really say, you know, like, you know, I worked on a ship and I did this, da 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 da. Well, so is everybody else. So, you know, it's hard for people to come forward now and actually substantiate, put a stamp on their testimony and prove it, because that's what everybody wants is proof.
That was one of the things about your testimony, was so much of it could be substantiated on Earth. Right. And the rest of us, we had to wait for the technology we described to come public.
That's right. I definitely am the rarity where somebody that served on Earth and then was sold off into the space program. So that's not a normal thing.
Well, I do have good news for you, Tony. There are people that have massive facts, and myself included. I mean, this is exactly what's going on. I know that you don't know me that well, but I have legitimate history that Penny, I mean, she's seen the documents.
Yeah,
I have experience, and I'm going to be spreading it, but I'm looking for an audience because I'm not going to say really important stuff to a wall.
That's right.
And Tony, right. Eric paid for Lou and I to come to his house and spend a week in Alaska with him and his lady. And we did some sightseeing, but we spent the time going through the records that he has. I've seen his pay stubs from working at Raytheon's South Pole base. I've seen his DD-214. He's real.
I've seen stuff. I can support what a lot of people are saying. So that's where I'm coming from, is that I've watched enough people to go, they're not lying.
Right.
Well, we are down to our last minute. Anything anybody want to say?
I just want to say thanks. Yeah, thanks. Great to meet you, Eric. I can't wait to talk to you in the future. And thanks to everybody else. Like I said, if you feel drawn to this subject, there's TonyRodriguez.com. Penny is out there as well. It's been great being here. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you so much, Tony, for coming.
Thank you, Penny.
I've been jazzed ever since you agreed to it. Thanks.
I'm happy Halloween, everybody. I'm going to get out there and hand out candy as soon as we're done.
Excellent.
Ours haven't started yet, but Lou is sitting there with the bowl by the door. So excellent. Happy Halloween. Bye, guys.
So long. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, take care.